60 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the privilege of being recognized to address you here on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, this nation's great deliberative body that we are. And I listened with interest to the gentlemen who have made their presentation in the previous hour. And I think back as we start this discussion, this 60-minute special order, about what's taking place in the country, and many of us watched the President do his press conference. I wouldn't be very surprised if President Obama has at this point reached the threshold for press conferences in his career that would match that of Ronald Reagan's. Ronald Reagan didn't believe in coming before the American people a lot of times in a row, and that's clearly not the case with President Obama, Madam Speaker. And we are here dealing with a full court press across this nation that seeks to, as the President seeks to sell his budget to the American people. And we have watched the Congressional Budget Office come out with their estimates on what this budget's going to cost. I've watched the target move. I've watched the irresponsibility of the spending grow. And if you add up the cumulative total of the money that has been spent, taxpayers' money spent, borrowed and spent, I don't really know anybody that has that full total. And we need to put it down here on the floor and ring it up every day, just like you put the little thermometer up when you've got a fundraising drive for a new library. The only thing will be that there won't be new libraries for our children and grandchildren if we continue on this path. I recall, Madam Speaker, the President making a statement that in order to repair this economy, we need to construct this multi-legged stool. And the stimulus plan is only one leg of a multi-legged stool. That's by his words. And so I made the remark then, and that one leg of a multi-legged stool, it wasn't a milking stool, that'd be one leg. It wasn't a two-legged stool. I've never seen one of those. There'd be no practical reason to have a two-legged stool. It would fall over. And so a three-legged stool, he would have said so, but we know it's multi-legged. So that's at least four, maybe more, with the legs for this stool that he'd like to construct to solve our economic crisis at a price tag per leg of $1 to $2 trillion each. And when I said that a month or so ago, there was a significant amount of criticism that I was exaggerating the President's budget. But, Madam Speaker, I'd submit that, no, now the Congressional Budget Office has exceeded my exaggerated estimate in their objective conservative estimate of what this budget is going to cost this country in debt and cost the American people. And as I listened to the press conference today, I have been familiar with the term that was trotted out in nearly every press conference, of which there have been many, and there are two things we can't get a total on: how much money is being spent and how many press conferences we've had that set policy for this economy. But I had gotten used to the term that the President had inherited a $1 trillion debt from his predecessor. Madam Speaker, I'd point out that no president inherits a debt from his predecessor president. A president can't spend any money. A president can't initiate any spending. In fact, a senator can't initiate spending. It's got to be initiated by Constitution right here in the United States House of Representatives. That budget, that spending, that deficit for the 110th Congress and the deficit coming into the 111th Congress, that's the Pelosi debt, the Pelosi deficit. That's the money that was appropriated by this Congress that established much of the debt that was inherited by the 111th Congress, that would be administered by the executive branch, which would be the President of the United States. His job is to carry out the policies we set and take care to enforce the laws with due diligence. But his statement has been he inherited a $1 trillion debt. Today we have another milestone I hadn't heard before, Madam Speaker, and that is now he's inherited a $1.3 trillion debt. So the inheritance is growing for the President, but it's shrinking for our grandchildren, unless we consider that they're inheriting debt as well, and the burden of supporting this government and taking it out of duly earned profits in future years, without a prospect of being able to pay for this, without a plan to come out of it, and the argument that if we just do something to establish socialized medicine, that will solve our economic problems. I cannot connect the dots on that kind of a statement, Madam Speaker, and it concerns me a great deal. So the inherited debt, which is not inherited from his predecessor, the President Bush, but it is debt that's inherited from the 110th Congress and previous Congresses. It's grown to $1.3 trillion. but the debt the American people inherit out of this is over $8 trillion, perhaps over $10 trillion, and we are still configuring and constructing more legs of this multi-legged stool that's supposed to bring us out of this economic crisis. And I listened as that language unfolded, and you have to listen very carefully to understand the meaning of the President's words. And it is usually an artful job of crafting this ambiguity of language, that allows me to pull out of it the meaning that I want to know and hear, and allows someone, my ideological opposite, to draw an opposite meaning from the same words, the same phrase. There are a lot of different ways to describe it. I'm going to be generous and call it a classical ambiguity style. And I find myself sometimes turning down the volume and waiting for the newspaper the next day, because you really have to parse all this language and analyze it, and it's hard for me to find time for that. But some of this language is more clear than others. And I intend to take up the issue in a moment of the President's appointment to the Office of Legal Counsel. But prior to doing so, I think it would be appropriate to transition over into the economic circumstances and recognize the gentlelady from Minnesota for so much time as she may consume to talk about whatever it be on her mind.
I thank the gentleman from Iowa, also known as the stunning Steve King of Iowa, as stated by national political commentators who certainly know what they're talking about. Steve King is one of our stalwart patriots who's here on the floor fighting on behalf of the American people, and we're here tonight to talk about several subjects. We can't avoid the first subject that's on the table. It's the fact that under President Obama's budget that he has put forward, President Obama's budget simply spends too much, it taxes too much, and it certainly borrows too much. We're very concerned about the excessive spending that's contained in this bill. It is $3.9 trillion. That's almost $4 trillion in spending under this budget deficit. This is a historical presidency. Historical for the amount of spending that is occurring under this president. $3.9 trillion. Not only is that a huge amount of money just for spending and just for taxing, we know that just the energy tax alone that the president is putting in his budget is $2 trillion in spending. The president's aides just came out within this last week and said that it's not $646 billion as we thought. It is nearly $2 trillion. That means for people in Minnesota, for people that are watching this evening, Madam Speaker, we're looking at perhaps an additional $4,000 per year out of the gate that every American household will see in increased taxes for energy. $4,000 a year in increased taxes. Who can afford that right now? When 401ks are down, when the value of houses are down, when jobs are on the line, we can't afford that, Madam Speaker. The President surely must know that. But borrowing too much. Representative Steve King talked about the massive borrowing that's coming from under our President's budget. This is what's remarkable. President Obama is borrowing so much of your tax money, Madam Speaker, of the American people's money, that literally President Obama's debt will be more than all previous presidents combined. Madam Speaker, you heard me correctly. From George Washington through George W. Bush, the 43rd president, you can add up the debt level of every one of those presidents. And day after day after day, we hear President Obama blaming the previous administration for the current situation he's in. But President Obama will lay so much debt on the backs of the American people that it will trump all 43 presidents combined. That's historic. Take a look. These are the figures that are put out, and they show, this is the Office of Management and Budget, and these are the figures that the president himself points to. The figures here on the left are the figures for debt prior to President Obama coming into office. These figures on the right are the debt amount that President Obama, by his own figures, say will be accumulated. $20 trillion in debt by President Obama's own figures. As a matter of fact, the Congressional Budget Office came out and said so rosy were the president's figures that he undercounted his debt by $2.3 trillion. He has rosy estimates of how great the economy is going to grow, and he has very conservative estimates on how high his debt will grow. We're concerned. We're very concerned about what the future debt load will be on the American people. I'm often reminded of the founders, and Representative Steve King and I stand here tonight in this chamber, Madam Speaker, together with yourself. We are literally standing on the shoulders of the founders of this great country. And it was the founders of our country, as we look through the rearview mirror of history, who very clearly made it known that our government was to be a constitutional government formed on limited government principles. And the day that the founders signed the Constitution, they also signed the first 10 amendments to that Constitution. And those 10 amendments were given as a gift, a protection to the individual American. Why? Because our founders were so concerned about the abuse of taxing authority of their mother country, Great Britain. They were so concerned about that abuse of a taxing authority that they said to the American people in the first 10 amendments, we want you to know that your federal government will be limited in its power. And in the 10th Amendment, they specifically said these limited powers that we are giving to the federal government are all the federal government will have. Every other power that there is will be given back to the states. We, the federal government, won't hold that power. We give it back to the states. This is very important to realize, because our president doesn't seem to see it that way, Madam Speaker. Our president seems to think that the time and energy and productive years belongs to Uncle Sam and not to the individual. That's a completely different way of looking at the world than what our founders viewed. And this evening, Madam Speaker, Representative King wants to turn the subject now to talking about the gift of life, the gift of human life, the issue that our framers talked about in the Declaration of Independence, when they called out for inalienable rights and said that we Americans were created by a God, that our Creator God created us. He gave us inalienable rights, rights that only God can give, rights that no government confer, nor can any government take away, that among those rights are life, liberty, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. And tonight, I know that's what Representative Steve King wants to speak about, Madam Speaker. He wants to speak about that cherished gift enunciated in the Declaration of Independence, the right to life, and why we are so genuinely concerned about the nomination to the Office of Legal Counsel that President Obama is making in the individual that Representative King will be speaking. I yield back to Representative King.
Reclaim my time and thank the gentlelady from Minnesota for the eloquent presentation on the economic side of this thing and the very smooth transition into the life side. And this is an important issue that sets before this Congress. Before I go to that issue, I would comment that in looking at the chart of the debt and the cumulative effect of the debt of the President Obama's debt compared to the sum total of all the previous administrations, Congress has started, presidents signed the appropriations bills. There's another statistic that I saw that was a calculation from the Congressional Budget Office that took this debt in the budget that's been proposed by President Obama and lays it out into the future. The greatest share of our GDP that we've had as debt in a budget was 1945, right at the end of World War II. And this Obama budget projects to be not 100% of GDP, but twice as high, 200% of GDP, as a calculation that comes from numbers produced by the Congressional Budget Office. And, Madam Speaker, I'd point out another component of this, that yesterday there was a plan that was rolled out that was played off of former Secretary of Treasury Henry Paulson, who argued that he should have $700 billion to pick up toxic assets from the lending institutions. And that proposal was rolled out yesterday. And here's how this calculates, and that is that the federal government